right, well, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Conversations on Couches. Today I'm joined by Rebecca Bjorkman, also known as Becky B. She's part of the dynamic duo at Discovery known as the Beckys. And Becky, why don't you tell me a little bit about the couch that you're on right now?
It's one of, oh my gosh, six pieces of furniture in our living room.
Nice.
And it's also the one that doesn't have a window or a door directly behind it.
Okay.
So the backlighting, I was really going for that,
Yeah,
not this craziness over here.
that's awesome. Uh, Well, thanks for joining me for this conversation. This season, if you will, we're talking with people in our community who are passionate about a wide variety of things, and then exploring what that passion is, how they got there, and then how they experience God through that, how they see that as part of building God's kingdom. And you are a teacher, and from at least from what I have observed, you are stoked about being a teacher, which is awesome. So tell us a little bit about how that happened. Like, how did you get this passion for teaching?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I think going back to like when I was a kid, um, the very first thing that I wanted to be when I grew up was like a princess, right? Like a little kid, like you're a girl, you want to be a princess. And then the next thing that I wanted to be was a teacher. And so I think it was kind of funny that it started so young. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that my mom went back to school to get her teaching credential when I was in elementary school.
Ah,
Um, and so I got to see a lot of the background behind what it looked like to become a teacher. I was a teacher's kid. I stayed after school and helped her with things. And when I was in elementary school, that looked like helping her write the posters in really nice handwriting and helping grade the second grade papers. And that's what I thought teaching was. And I was like, okay, I'm good at this. I can write well, I can grade papers. I'm going to be a great teacher.
yeah,
Um, and then, I kept going and learning more, right? Um, I always really, really enjoyed math. I had some really good math teachers. I had some not as great math teachers. And I think it was really interesting seeing, I think from the student perspective, what that looked like. But I think I was generally that kid in class that I really loved working in groups. People would ask me questions, and I just really loved getting that response of like, oh, I get it now. That was like my high. Like I loved that, seeing people understand it because of the way that I articulated the answers. And so I think that also kind of drove me towards teaching. But again, that's a really small, very specific perspective of what teaching is. Teaching is like a really
sure.
wide, broad thing, right? And so coming to college, still learning math, taking education courses, I think continued to broaden this idea of what teaching was, that there's, cultural components that come into play. There's administration and parents and teaching with standards in mind, and teaching to a test and that kind of a thing. And there's so many tricky hoops to jump through, especially in American education. And so it's like, oh man, sometimes teaching can feel very constrained, but I feel like as soon as I got into the classroom and started really working with kids, that's when that passion really started igniting again, is being able to work one-on-one with a kid and see them start the year as someone who's like, I'm not really a math person. I don't really want to be here, to getting to the end of the year and they're like, I think I can do this, like gaining that confidence. And I think even this year, I just gave a survey to some of my students, and some of them are like really excited about math. They're like, oh, I really enjoy math class. I love being here.
Hmm.
And then some kids that are like, I really hate math, but you're my teacher and I think that makes it better. And so I think that is really what gets me going and gets me excited about teaching, is just being there with the kids and helping them towards those goals that they have.
Yeah, that's awesome. I uh, I had the same math teacher my sophomore and senior year of high school, and he was great. And then I had someone else in between that year, and it was not great. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like math is especially one of those subjects where your teacher can make or break the experience so significantly. Just real quick, tell us what exactly you are teaching, what grade level, just so people kind of know.
Yeah, sure. So I'm at Winters High School this year. I teach math to mostly 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. So it's called Integrated Math 3, and then I teach pre-calculus and AP calculus.
Wow, the easy ones, nice. Yeah,
It's so fun though. It's so fun. I love it.
that's great. Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about like the fun part of it, because like I um so one of the great ironies of my own story, I don't know that I've ever told you this before, but I hated math in high school with the exception of those 2 years that I just told you about. And so I was a history major as an undergrad and thought that I would go into teaching, but obviously teaching like history and social science and all that stuff. But the jobs that were available for me right out of school, California, shortage of teachers in science and math. I ended up teaching a lot of math, and I taught geometry and algebra 1 and pre-algebra for a little while. So the great irony of my life is that I ended up becoming a math teacher, at least for a short period of time. And it was a okay job. I wouldn't necessarily describe it as fun. So like I think that there's this big connection though between like when you're really passionate about something, it isn't just work, it does become fun. So tell us a little bit more about that. Like how do you experience fun? How do you experience joy? And how does that connect to this idea of passion for you in teaching?
Yeah, yeah. I think, well, when I think about my fun class that I really love teaching, and I mean, I do really love all of my classes, but this year I have a 6-student class in AP Calculus.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, first of all, it's really fun because I get to know those 6 students really well because especially on Zoom in this very awkward environment that we're in because of COVID,
Yeah.
they all have their cameras on, they can all unmute their microphones and we can be talking the whole class because there's only 7 of us in this classroom. So I think that's really fun, just like the initial environment of the class. But I think it's also fun because I don't know, I think they also enjoy it. I think we kind of have this this kind of bouncing off each other collaborative environment. I make all kinds of Mean Girls references because we're learning about limits. And so it's like, oh, the limit does not exist. Let's go, you know? And so they just roll their eyes because, you know, they're 12th graders and they don't think I'm cool yet. But yeah, I think it's fun because I think they understand the environment that I'm trying to create, which is that mistakes are good and okay, and we learn from them, and they don't feel embarrassed about putting their ideas forward. It's like the learning is interesting because we're putting together all these concepts that they've been learning for such a long time. I think calculus is kind of that like pinnacle of the high school experience in math as far as why have we been learning what we've been learning? It's because of calculus. And so, yeah, I think that's what kind of makes the environment fun, just the kids, and then also putting everything together and just kind of having fun with it and not taking ourselves too seriously.
That's awesome. And it's an AP class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's great too, because again, there can be a lot of pressure with
Oh my
some of
gosh,
those
yeah.
classes, right?
So, yeah, I think this year especially too, because COVID makes things so tricky and what is going to be on the test and what's not. I think there's so much anxiety and stress, especially in students nowadays. And so trying to relieve some of that, I think is also a big goal for teachers right now.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what I would call the sort of spiritual side or the spirituality of passion for a minute. So one of my like deep convictions is that God meets us in our passions, that he's given us these things for a reason. And so there's kind of a two sides of this question. One is just, how do you experience God? Like you're passionate about teaching, you love math, you love working with these kids and seeing the light bulbs go off. Like, what does that teach you about God? How do you experience God through your passion for teaching? And then maybe the second question is, do you see a connection between that and like participating in God's kingdom? So I don't know if that's too many questions at one time, but either way you want to go with that. I'm kind of excited to hear how you see God in your vocation, your passion for teaching.
Yeah. I think a couple of the first like thoughts that come to mind are just some of the things that I have learned about God from the experiences that I've had as a teacher.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the first like pretty big revelations for me, I was student teaching, and I had to write weekly reflections on my teaching and my students and things. And so I was not in a good mood, and I was kind of frustrated, and I was like, oh, the student just keeps making the same mistakes over and over again, and I keep trying to help them, and they keep making these same mistakes, and I don't know how to help them, and they're not asking me for help, and they're not coming to office hours. And I think God in that moment really convicted me, and kind of flipped my perspective. And I kind of had this realization that, like, wow, in the same way that my student keeps making mistakes, I am a person that keeps making mistakes. Like, God is my teacher in that respect, or teacher, right? And he sees all of my repetitive sins that I turn to over and over and over again, and how I am not asking him for help, and I'm not seeking him. And yeah, it was just this moment of like real conviction. I was thinking about like the parable of like it's like a master that forgives his servant of debt, and then the servant goes and demands like $100 from his friend or something, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, I am this person that is not patient and that is not forgiving. And I think I've been learning more and more since then about what it looks like to have that patience and that forgiveness with my students, because God is so patient and forgiving with me. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that I found. I think also just how wonderful the community God has given me in that. I think so I have roommates that are teachers, and it's really fun to be able to just like pray over our students, pray over our coworkers together. My first year teaching, I was teaching at a middle school, and it was just incredible. Like the very first day that I met two of my new coworkers, we found out that the three of us were Christians, and God just orchestrated this like weekly prayer time. We would meet on Monday mornings, and we'd pray for the week. And I was not expecting that at all, but like how cool that God provided that community in this time that was like very stressful, and we were all new teachers, and we were just seeking his help and guidance. And I think, yeah, teaching is really hard. But I think just like looking to God in that, I think also, maybe to digress a little bit, I think it's interesting seeing how the things that I was taught in my credentialing program about how to teach are so reflected in the way that Jesus taught in scripture. It's really interesting how when you have like a big group of people, direct instruction is very helpful, and how like Jesus, when he was talking to the crowds, it was very much direct instruction. He used, hooks, he used stories like parables. And then when he was in smaller groups, he would ask, like he would do checks for understanding, like, who do you say I am? And did you understand that? And he would further explain. He would use multiple representations. He used visual examples. He related to, the disciples' culture and their surroundings. And these are all things that we're taught to do. And I'm like, oh wow, I could have just looked in the book of Matthew, to find what I was learning in my credential program. And so I think it's sweet to see and learn from the example of Jesus and what it looks like to be a teacher, just in his, patience and forgiveness, how he was seeking out the folks, in society that were not the ones that you would think. He was looking to other cultures and folks of different abilities. And the group of students that I teach is a very diverse group of students. There's some folks that, maybe don't speak the English language. I have a couple students that really don't speak English. I have, students that have, learning disabilities and things like that. And I think about that example of Jesus where he is really seeking out those people and seeking to help them and make them feel known and loved and really cared for. And so I think, I guess in all of that was kind of a lot of words that just happened there, but I see a lot of God and his kingdom in my students and in this community that he's given me.
Wow, that answer was amazing. And there's like so many more things so now I need to we need to sit down at some point and you got to teach me all these terms, because as you were talking about it, I was like, oh yeah, like he totally, like Jesus did all those things. You're totally right. But I never thought about it like through that lens. So that's something that I need to learn more about. We'll talk about that again at some other point. One again, I'm not trying to make this about my experience as a teacher, but one of the things that was fun for me as a teacher, and I think you sort of alluded to this, was there's always that one kid that kind of surprised you, right? Where you thought either like this kid's going to drive me crazy, and then you end up like really liking them, or you think they're never going to get it, and then all of a sudden they do get it. And so, and again, I think like that, it's also similar to me for parenting. Like, there are times where I just get super frustrated with my kids, and then I have this like aha moment of like, oh yeah, this is probably how God feels about like dealing with me, And I wonder if like, I'm that kid, in his classroom of like, I really didn't think Steve was going to turn out so great, but he's, whatever. Like, so all that to say is like, there's so many elements to teaching, to leadership, to parenting, where I think that, clearly correlate to how God views us and things like that. Any sort of last thoughts there? I don't want to steal the floor from you, but how about, let me just end with this question. For pulling back from teaching and just thinking about passion as a category, like what would you say to someone who is passionate about something, but they're not quite sure, like, should I do this? Is this worthy? How can God use it? I mean, if they're asking those sorts of questions, what would you say to someone about chasing down their passions?
Yeah. I think two of the things that have been really important in my life as I've been chasing passion has been prayer, like really talking to God about it, and not in like the cliche of like, oh, you should go pray about it, but like really like seeking God and not just once, but consistently. And I think in consistently going to God, I think there's like this parable of how like, if this woman goes to this awful judge all the time, like he'll listen to her. And so why wouldn't God, this like gracious God, why wouldn't he listen to us? And I think, in the times where I have really prayed consistently over things, I think God has really shown up and shown his direction in my life. And I think the second thing is really just seeking out community and wise people in your life. I would say Christian people who know you well and can confirm and affirm you in what you're thinking about, what they know about you and what they know about God.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me on a couch and for answering questions and talking about teaching, sharing your passion with our community. So thank you, Becky.